What's going on, everyone? And welcome to another episode of Writing Friction. And as always, today's guest is pretty cool. Everyone say hello to Jeff VanderMeer. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. I got to ask, what's behind your right shoulder? Is there a theme to that
Behind
painting?
my right shoulder. First of all, let me figure out which is right from left. Yeah, that's actually it's actually an image by Eric Nyquist of all the different crazy creatures in my novel Born,
Okay.
which is kind of like got all kinds of like biotech creations that have been set loose in this kind of ruined city. So, and
Okay.
on the right, on the left rather, or the other side, is the first cover for one of the first books I ever had published, City of Saints and Madmen. So.
That's super dope. That's something I think I would do. I'm a huge I'm an avid concert poster collector, and I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
getting my posters
yeah.
framed with the ticket stubs. It's a big hobby of mine. But I don't think we had anyone on the podcast with a nice frame up. Is that the back cover too? I can't see the full spread.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Okay. It's the
actually
full.
it's done like a fake illuminated
Yeah,
manuscript with text on the cover and the image in the middle. So
yeah. It's like a gold record almost. It's pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah, kind of, yeah,
That's
yeah,
dope. Well, we're already talking about music, so we were talking about before the
yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
Doing a little research before we did this. I mean, it seems like you're a pretty eclectic dude. You do a lot of things. The first thing that caught my eye is, and it's something that I've always thought about, but maybe you could talk more about it. Is
Mm-hmm.
you worked with a pretty popular band, the band Murder by Death,
Yes.
and correct me if I'm wrong. They wrote music to one of your books.
They did. They wrote music to Finch, which is kind of a noir fantasy with this kind of hard-boiled detective in it, and it's amazing music. Like I used to have a playlist that it would come along, and I'd forget it was from my the soundtrack for my novel. Like that's pretty cool. Like one thing they did is there's one point where the detective actually goes to this like underground party, and there's a band that's using like found objects like trash can lids
Yeah,
to make music,
yeah.
and they actually created a song on this album that's using those same instruments, which I thought was so cool.
Well,
So
so two questions. One, was there any connection to the band beforehand? And two, whose idea was it? Was it their idea or your idea?
yeah, well, I've actually had soundtracks. I had soundtracks for all the books in that series, starting out
Oh,
with
okay.
experimental soundtrack by a guy named Robert Devereaux, and then the Church, that band with the Under the Milky Way song, did one for the one before that. And then I'd always loved Murder by Death music, and so I just took a chance and I reached out to them. It turned out they were big science fiction fantasy fans, and
Yeah.
I sent them the book. They responded to it, and they wanted to do it, and we found a way to monetize it, so it made sense. So.
I mean, it's something I always thought about with a way to at least promote a book, if not,
Mm,
way to monetize more.
yeah.
I mean, you're talking to a dude who's at the tail end of writing a fictional rock and roll band novel. I mean,
Oh,
it's pretty
cool.
much
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm like
yeah,
in the world of, late 90s
yeah,
music. Just that's
yeah.
what I've been the last 3 years of my life. But I'm also a musician. I'm a touring musician. I've been playing in bands
Hmm.
forever.
So
And I've
you
always
can create the soundtrack.
literally, but it's something I've
Yeah,
always thought about.
yeah.
There's never books never seem to correlate with other art forms. I mean,
Hmm.
again, we're talking, you literally had to frame your book cover. There's no art that gets presented with books. It's just the book, the words, that's it. It's a done deal. But
Yeah.
talking about the idea of a soundtrack for a book is just another example. I mean, is that something you think about often, or are you always looking outside of
Yeah,
that?
well, I tend to blur the lines a lot. There have been short films that have been connected to the release of the books. A lot of the books have some kind of imagery inside that's actually like part of the plot, not just incidental decoration. And including Hummingbird Salamander, the latest one, which has some images inside that kind of like support what's going on in the narrative. So the music's just kind of an extension of that. And when it really works out well, the synergy is such that, like with the Murder by Death soundtrack, it's inspiring stuff for the next fiction set in that same place. So,
Mhm.
and I always listen to music when I'm writing. Like I
Do
need
you?
the right mood, like if I'm doing a real big dramatic scene, then I need something really big and dramatic in the background.
Yeah.
It has to be something that I've listened to a fair amount, so I don't get caught up in the lyrics. Because I remember a couple times I'd be writing, and I'd read the scene afterwards, and I'd be like, "Oh, I see. I typed the lyrics into my into my
That's
scene. Not
crazy.
good."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't write to music that has lyrics. Otherwise,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just I'm thinking. But
That's why I have to have listened to it a bit, and then the lyrics kind of are in the background in my head. But yeah, new stuff that I can't. So
has that always been your jam? Have you always been a person who works to music?
Yeah, absolutely. And I still remember that I was working on some really heavy kind of post-apocalyptic stuff way back when I was in my early 20s, and Midnight Oil had an album called Red Sails in the Sunset. This was before they hit it big. Like they had some really great like post-punk music, and then they hit it big, and I think people thought they were like really commercial, even though they still weren't. They just were a little more radio friendly. But this album was like just so important to me in terms of setting the mood and getting this kind of alien vibe. So a lot of times the music is kind of almost a collaborator, you know.
Uh, um, have you always been a guy? I mean, aliens and post-apoc. I mean, has that always been since you've been a kid? Is that something you've always been obsessed with or really into?
I think it's just that I have this I like weird nature. So
Yeah.
like I studied squid and fungus for a long time, and those things seem alien to me. And like stuff comes out of that then in the fiction appears even pretty weirder to other people. Although it's the weirdest thing is just simply that I have a wide readership right now, considering what I write about. But yeah, I've always been fascinated with like the natural world, and that then kind of feeds into it because there's so much stuff in the natural world that's actually kind of bizarre. And then I just try to write about that because it's what my experience is. So.
Well, did you grow up in a natural environment? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I actually grew up in Fiji because my parents were in the Peace Corps, and
Literally.
so it was basically a tropical paradise.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my mom was a biological illustrator, so we would have like sea turtles flapping around on the front lawn long enough for her to draw them
Oh
and things
wow.
like that. And we'd be going out to these outer islands so that my dad could study rhinoceros beetles and stuff. So it definitely was like that. And then when we moved to Florida, when we came back,
Which is even
um,
gnarlier.
right. Actually, it is kind of just the same, and it's actually a good thing. I mean, where we live in North Florida is like one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. I mean, it's the yard right now. You wouldn't even believe it. It's just teeming with wildlife, basically, and we're almost in the center of Tallahassee, Florida. So
Is that where you are right now?
yeah.
Uh huh.
So
I
right before we came on, there was actually an owl fighting with a red-tailed hawk outside in the ravine.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up. My parents are from the Bronx, and I grew up in northern New Jersey. But
Okay.
our family vacation every year was
Yeah.
going to visit the grandparents in Fort Lauderdale. And
Yeah.
my
Yeah. Okay.
grandfather, one of my grandfathers, was an avid golfer. And
Yeah. Yeah.
one day he took me out on a golf. I was a kid, and we're playing, and all of a sudden he's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, Michael, look to the left." And I looked, and there's a fucking alligator that's
Oh yeah.
probably, I mean, and I'm a kid, and to me, and
Yeah.
that image is burnt. So every time I go back to Florida, I literally expect Alligator Alley, right? That highway that
Oh
goes.
yeah. And actually, my wife's family is from Fort Lauderdale, so we've been down there quite a bit. So I
Yeah,
know the vibe down there very well.
yeah.
And the alligator thing cracks me up because they're not usually very dangerous, but like the one time I took somebody really hiking way out at like this wildlife refuge, and I kept telling him, "Oh, the gators aren't dangerous." I forgot it was actually mating season, and so there was one gator across the path that probably would have cut us in half. And so it's just kind of funny because like usually they're very dormant, they're like sleepy logs, but there's a certain season where they're hyper alert and you definitely don't want to tangle with them. So I have jumped over a gator before,
Literally.
and what that looks like is just simply you're walking along and there's water on both sides and a raised trail, and the gator's long enough that if you time the jump right, it doesn't even notice because its head's like in the grass. So. But
I
you got
mean,
to time the jump right.
shit. I mean, I'm not. Again, I grew up in northern New Jersey. I didn't grow up around alligators. I grew up
Yeah, but
around.
you got like the Pine Barrens and all that up there
Yeah,
too,
that's
right?
where
I
the
mean,
mafia kills people. That's where I grew up
yeah,
around.
yeah. So
And
alligators are mafia. Pick your.
exactly, yeah. But now I live in San Francisco, and I take my puppy. I have a puppy, and we go hiking up
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Marin and stuff. You see rattlesnakes all the time.
yeah.
Um,
No gators there though.
Definitely not. No, there's a different kind of gator here, but
Yeah.
we won't get into that. So growing up in Fiji, I mean, how old were you when you went to Florida? I mean, did you spend your whole childhood in Fiji?
I was maybe nine and a half when we came
Okay.
back to the
Yeah.
U.S. and so just old enough to appreciate it and remember some things,
Yeah.
and then fill in the rest with like photographs.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
But
yeah.
but no, we moved to Ithaca for 2 terrible years because going from Fiji to Ithaca in the dead of winter was like another planet. And so we quickly left. Even though I like Ithaca now, when I go, upstate New York, great. But
Yeah.
but then it was like just horrifying.
My uncle who listens to this podcast lives in Ithaca, and he's gonna like
Okay,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Oh,
it's a
he's
great
a
city. It really
professor.
is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Ithaca's an interesting place. So when did the writing bug hit you? I mean, again,
Yeah.
it seems like you're a pretty prolific dude. I mean, when did this all start snowballing up for you?
Actually, in Fiji, I was around 7 or 8 when I started writing, and I had kept these bird lists because I like birding. And one day I just started writing short stories about birds and stuff. And I don't know why. I just I got hooked on. My parents, gave me a lot of books very early and read to us, and I think I just got really hooked on storytelling. And so ever since then, I've been writing, and I think that was really the biggest strength for me is that I knew very early on that's what I wanted to do. And I think the biggest problem sometimes is when you don't. So by the time I went to college, I still knew I wanted to write. I'd already been published and been submitting work. And, I dropped out of college because I went in going for a journalism degree thinking that was the responsible thing to do and realizing all I really wanted to do was write fiction. So I dropped out of college. I got a tech writing and editing job, which was fairly lucrative and not enough, it didn't take so much of my brain that I couldn't write on the side, and just kind of went from there, and then eventually became a full-time writer. So.
You said a tech writing job. Was this like during the early 2000s, or when was this?
Yeah, it was before that. It was be like in the 90s, and then into the early 2000s. I became a full-time writer in 2007. So I worked for like 3 different jobs. One was pretty hilarious because it was like personal assistant for a kind of eccentric genius who wrote manuals for different industries. I remember one time, without going into detail, that he assigned me to get Michael Jackson to support do an ad for small private aircraft because that supported something that he was doing manuals for. And so I spent the stupidest week of my life trying to contact Michael Jackson, knowing it was futile and also, given the news, probably a terrible idea. So there was a lot of weird crap that happened. I mean, I had another day job where somebody threw a tile at me and almost caught me in the throat because it was like a Lord of the Flies with middle management. I mean, it was some really interesting gigs in the sense that it gave me a lot of writing material.
And you were writing during that whole time when you were doing these odd jobs?
Yeah. I mean, I learned not to be very precious about the right kind of pen, the right time. I learned not to be precious about writing something in order. So that helped a lot. Like if I had 30 minutes, I just wrote the part of the novel I was passionate about and worried about how it was all going to sequence later.
Oh, really? Okay.
So it was like, some of these jobs, like one I had a 60-hour a week job where we're going around the state of Florida and a contractor with the county health department going to every single county health department in some pretty interesting places, let's put it that way, and trying to write at the same time. And I mean, I remember it was so weird. Like the guy I was doing the project with, like, lost a tooth in the middle of a meeting. It just popped out of his face. I mean, all kinds of weird stuff happened. So
you say he lost a tooth?
Yeah. I mean, he lost a tooth. I remember one time that we almost got in a car accident. Another time I was trying to print out stuff in the hotel printer room, and this psychopath came in and started harassing me. And it's just, all kinds of weird stuff.
You're really helping out the state of Florida in this podcast.
Yeah, I know. I really shouldn't say this, It's like
guy ran in naked with a machete, screaming. Yeah. So I guess I want to kind of get back to what you just said before, though, about you can write and you could skip along. I'll ask a general question. When you start a project, do you already know the end?
Basically what it is, I don't start writing until I know the end, even if the end changes by the time I finish the draft.
Okay.
So my process now is a little different, which is to say I do a lot of writing in my head while I'm hiking or at the gym, something where I have to kind of be away from the writing. So it kind of makes it easier to think about it, oddly enough, not being at the computer. And I'll just take notes on little note cards. I don't like using a phone or anything for that. I'm very superstitious about losing something or something getting deleted.
You mean like the notes and stuff like that on your phone?
Yeah. I don't like using that at all. I like it to be a physical act, more physical than that. And so I'll even write on a leaf. There was one hike where I ran out of paper and I had to figure out what leaves would not crumble to dust in my pocket.
Reminds me of the book Papillon?
Which one?
Papillon.
No, I don't think I know that one.
It was by a French author. They made a movie out of it in the 70s.
Oh, Papillon. Yeah.
Yeah, but he was right in the book. He talks about he was writing.
He was writing
like literally on his foot. Yeah.
But then what happens is I basically will take, and those will be like scene fragments, character ideas, details. I'll at the end of a week I'll take all of that material and I'll type it up in chronological order in a Word document. So by the time I actually start to write a novel, I might have 33,000, 35,000 words of scene fragments, character ideas that are chronologically set up. So that's almost like a weird fragmented outline. Like, so I
Okay.
know certain things are going to happen.
Any
By the,
dialogue or scene
yeah,
description?
dialogue, little scenes like that,
Yeah.
things like that. And so, some of that might not make it into the final novel, but having it there in one document, most of the time when I get to around 35,000 words, I know, okay, it's time to actually write a rough draft. And then what I'll
Uh-huh.
do is I'll sit down and I'll try to write the first 15, 20 pages, get the style right, get the voice right, and kind of perfect that. And once I have that perfect and I kind of know the voice of the character, feel like I can method act the character, then I'll write the rest. And I'll just do a full rough draft without rewriting, and then I'll go back and rewrite
Okay.
after that.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying, your technique is very different than most people that come on the
I
podcast,
think it is probably.
I'm of a similar vibe. I'm a writer who, to me, like when I wrote this novel, I started at the end of the book. Like, what the end
Yeah,
of the book in the first
yeah,
chapter, right? Like the band
yeah,
breaks up. Like so I
yeah,
bring you. But to me, that was how I was able to write that book, by knowing the end. And it seemed,
yeah.
but that never took away the creative spark in me, because filling in the rest of it was,
Mhm.
it almost allowed more freedom in me. Um, yeah,
Well, yeah. I mean, in theory, a novel is a journey anyway. It's not just about where you wind up in the end. So
yeah,
depending on how you think about it, I also think a lot of people don't necessarily experiment with their process early on. Like they do it one way and then they just keep doing it that way because that's the way they've done it.
yeah.
And really, especially when you're starting out, the best thing to do is experiment. Even time of day that you write, all kinds of things, and
Hmm.
writing out a sequence and see how that works for you. Yeah, so it's whatever doesn't break your ability to write the novel, whatever that is.
Well, did you kind of figure that out early on? I mean, it seemed like, again, you had to write when you had the time to write. I mean, you had no
Yeah,
other option.
yeah. Well, I mean, when I was a kid, I could write whenever I wanted to, and then
Yeah,
once I had to go out in the world, so I'd had that experience as well. I think also the fact that I wrote short stories before I started tackling novels.
yeah.
So that, I was writing a lot of different kinds of short stories, and it wasn't that I was just writing them so I could write a novel. It's just that I wrote a lot of different types, and that gave me a lot of experience in what my process was and what worked for me and what didn't.
Yeah. So then,
And
what was the story behind getting that first novel behind your left shoulder published?
that was a long ass process. It was a novel called City of Saints and Madmen, and I first of all had it rejected by all the major publishers. The individuals connected stories that I tried to sell those. I had really a lot of trouble selling those, even though I sold a lot of short stories in general.
Yeah.
And I had some weird experiences. Like one small press publisher bought it and then became a religious fanatic. And when it came time for the edits, he wanted me to edit it so that all the characters were symbolic of characters in the Old Testament, which made no sense for the novel. Another editor, and it's a fantasy novel in an imaginary place, said, "Oh, I'll take this, but you have to change the setting to 1900s Paris and take out the fantasy element," which made no sense. And then the worst one was this guy who bought it, this small press, and he had me collect money from friends and fans for a limited edition. And I heard nothing for 6 months. Everything had been going well. And then finally, out of the blue, he emails me and says that he's on his honeymoon. He spent all the money on his honeymoon, and he's really sorry he can't publish the book. Later, I found out he actually had a nervous breakdown because he'd been bilking so many people out of money for his
Well,
press, and he was actually in a sanitarium, but he thought that sounded wrong.
you couldn't have been the only one. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was actually emailing me from a different account, pretending to be his own lawyer to try and stop me from getting the money back. So I
Wow.
just let it sit for a while. And then finally, another small press came along that published it. And then this weird thing happened where the same stuff that was unpublishable found a major commercial publisher. And then this last year, those novels, the Ambergris novels, were reprinted by FSG. So you just never know. Sometimes it's not the right moment. Sometimes you're with the wrong people. And the main thing all along was I knew it was pretty surreal stuff. So I couldn't like take someone's advice that, oh, this is too, this isn't right or whatever. It's what I was writing. I knew that there might be a moment for it to become more popular, but I couldn't write something else.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, it seems like you're a pretty level-headed dude. I mean, when these were suggestions were getting told to you back then, I don't know how old were you when this was happening.
I was in my early 20s. So
So you're a young guy. I mean, were you
yeah.
were not were you pretty non-emotional about it? Were you kind of like this? I see this for what it is. I'm going to stick to my guns.
I was sticking to my guns wasn't a problem because the way my subconscious works, I just can't physically change something in a way I don't think is right. But
Yeah.
not that I don't take editorial suggestions, just I just can't, I couldn't do Paris in 1900. But no, I was actually pretty upset because back then, I was publishing short stories, but I didn't have any kind of name in the business at all. So
Yeah.
I kept thinking this is going to be my big break, and it kept breaking on me in this weird way, and so where I became very paranoid about publishing in general. Learned a lot along the way, but yeah, so no, it was pretty devastating at the time, and I just had to pick up the pieces. But what's good about that is when you have that happen to you early on, later on is when nothing really phases you. So since then, when there have been down periods, it doesn't faze me at all. Because I've never seen anything quite as ridiculous as what I saw when I started out. And I think that you see this with like boxers and stuff too. It's like the boxer who's 24-0 and knocked everybody out and then comes up against a difficult opponent might not actually have the psychological wherewithal to endure actual opposition, And I think it's the same thing with writers. Sometimes if your first book is like really big and huge and everybody tells you you're wonderful, then if something terrible happens down the line, you don't necessarily have the fortitude to deal with it.
My first book that came out a year ago is about an old retired boxer.
Oh, really?
In Jersey
cool.
City, and he's training this young and up and coming heavyweight in a boxing gym in Jersey City.
Yeah.
I'm a boxing fanatic. So when you said boxing,
I am too, actually.
Okay. I started boxing 4 years ago.
Yeah, I don't box, but I follow the sport quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's my sport. But we won't turn this into a boxing.
No. But I mean, what I was thinking specifically then was
I'll send you a copy of my book.
Yeah. I want to read it now, definitely. But yeah, it's not turning into boxing. But I find the psychology of all that really fascinating.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, when you said you learn all that stuff in the beginning, to me, it's like getting just thrown in the deep end. You got to learn how to swim.
Yeah, it's like the deceptive boxer who has like a 15-7 record, but you don't realize that he was thrown in with like the toughest opposition, and suddenly out of nowhere he's like beating guys he's not supposed to beat, right?
There are people who have to fight Canelo Alvarez while Canelo Alvarez is on the way up. People have to fight him, right? And those guys, exactly. They're called journeymen.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a dude, he's going to come on the podcast. I don't know if you know him. His name's Michael Montero, and he has a really popular boxing radio show and a podcast. Yeah. He's like one of those, ringside guys on the computer and stuff.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to a boxing match? I've never been to one.
I've never had the opportunity. I mean, I guess that the couple of times there's been a boxing match in Tallahassee, it's been at a skill level where I'm just afraid of, and looking at the opponents, I'm like, basically this one guy's going to just beat the crap out of the other. I don't know if I want to watch that.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, you said, have you had a chance to, do you ever travel back to Southeast, to Fiji? I mean, anywhere you go back to these places?
I haven't been back to Fiji. I have traveled, one thing we did in the Peace Corps is we traveled around the world before we came back to the U.S. And that was pretty formative for like 6 months in like YMCAs and hostels and stuff. And that was pretty intensely amazing.
Yeah.
And I've gone back to some of those countries, but there's something weird in my mind about Fiji, which is I would like to go back, but at the same time, it is a hell of a long distance. And also I have this Fiji in my mind from being a kid. I just don't know. I don't know how that would match up.
It's like Gilligan's Island, right?
I don't know if it's like Gilligan's Island, but yeah, I don't know. It's a weird thing. I do want to go back, but
the reason I asked is I was in Thailand maybe 2 years ago or something like that. And in Bangkok, they have this big famous kickboxing.
Yes, of course. Muay Thai. Yeah.
And Muay Thai. And I went to their fight. I went to the fight. And I mean, it's a scene straight out of Roadhouse. People behind chain fences, smoking cigarettes, gambling, and it was out of. But all
that stuff is really intense.
Yeah, but to my eye, it seemed like every fight was fixed.
Oh, really?
People, like fighters were just taking falls. Like they brought one guy out on a stretcher. It was almost like half Muay Thai, half WWF. It was weird.
Right. And that's one of the things that's put me off of boxing a little bit is sometimes when it's clear that fixes in on the judges' scorecards and it's so clearly one sided the other way, that's put me off a little bit. So I don't.
It's really what's put a lot of people off from the sport, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know, there's some decisions where it's just your jaws on the floor.
Yeah.
But then it goes the other way where you have, you know, Deontay Wilder saying that, you know, Tyson Fury had egg shakers in his hand or what.
I followed that guy, and for the longest time, I thought he was the real deal.
What
I
a
really
bummer.
did.
What a bummer.
And just
Yeah.
not enough technique in the end, is it? Or something,
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I think they just we're recording this. I think Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua just got signed.
Yeah. So
yeah.
that'll be interesting too.
God, we're turning off a lot of people right now.
Yeah.
So let's try to focus this back around. So when the ball started going, you know, what was your move? You stayed in Florida. Have you always been a Florida guy? Is this where you spent your life?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in after coming back to Fiji in Gainesville, Florida, which is closer to Central Florida, and then moved up to be with Anne, who became my wife now, to Tallahassee, which is North Florida. I just fell in love with this place. It is so wild. Like I said, it's just like wilderness in the city, which is something I love. But there's still enough culture that you got that as well. I couldn't really live in a big city.
Yeah.
So this is kind of suits me, and you know, I've grown to love and be an advocate for the environment here, and so we're pretty much here. Although I love the West Coast of California. I mean, there's nothing I like better than that in terms of.
Yeah, I'm looking at the sun literally coming over the, you know, right now. But the reason I asked was, I mean, as an author, I mean, did you have to, you know, it seems like all the publishers are in New York. Did you have, was that an issue not being around New York City at any point in your career, or?
Not really. And I mean, my agent isn't even in New York. She's in Vancouver, but she travels there. She uses email and everything. I think it's much less centralized in the sense of you don't have to be a writer there. And of course, you know, especially early on, it really helped that it's cheap to live in Tallahassee. I mean, I don't know if I could have even transitioned to becoming a full-time writer at first if I lived in New York City. I mean, that's just nuts.
Yeah.
So I think that's also a factor, but no, it's never really hindered me at all. And of course, the more and more the internet's become, you know, omnipresent, the less.
Yeah. Well, how much have you seen this business change in your time, you know, writing and being in it?
I think there's more pressure that writers put on themselves to self-promote, given the opportunity to be visible. And sometimes I think that's counterproductive, because the first thing I think a writer needs to do is figure out what they're actually good at. You know what I mean? If you're best at face-to-face, that's what you should be doing. If you are crap at social media, you probably should, you know, limit your profile there. And also because you should do the thing that is most fun for you. So I think that's the biggest thing, is I see a lot of writers pushing themselves into spaces where they're uncomfortable, and maybe they think they have to, maybe sometimes they do, but I wish it wasn't necessary. And I do think that publishers do more work than people think. So, you know, that's the biggest thing.
I'm sorry. What was the last thing you said? You said about the publishers? I'm sorry.
So I think publishers do more work than people think. It's just a matter of like sussing it out and having the right meetings and the right communication. It's interesting. There's more opportunities for writers than ever before too. I mean, you can self-publish if you want, be successful that way. You can go through a traditional publisher. You can do some kind of mix of those things. You know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's almost like the music world when Napster came out, you know, as a musician, you know, all of a sudden, you know, and then I could record an album on my laptop, and now, you know, but it's that conversation of, you know, so I self-published my first book. It was the novella, because nobody wanted to publish a novella. And especially for a first-time author, and doing that, you know, I heard some different things, you know, people like, you know, when you try to get your second book published, you know, publishers might not want to work with you, things like that, because you self-published. And I'm like, but at the end of the day, it's like I got rejected by 73 agents. And
I don't even think that's even true. I mean, I don't think it's true. I mean, I think that there's more freedom when you're self-published, because when you're with a traditional publisher, they're always looking at the sales figures. With self-publishing, where you're not sure what your distribution methods are going to be and everything, a traditional publisher is not going to look at anything with regard to that experience and take it as symptomatic of what your audience is or isn't. You know, I mean, if you're really successful, that's great. Then they'll definitely pick up on that. But if you're not, it's not going to matter. So, you know, I don't find any stigma attached to self-publishing. I think it's just another tool that you can use in a particular situation when you need to, you know?
Yeah. And in 2020, you know, it's different than in 1990, if you were trying to self-publish a book. I don't even know how you would do that. But today,
well, I did actually. My first collection was self-published then. And basically what you did is you went down to the print shop and you had them print up your book, and you had like maybe 500 copies, and you did what you could to sell them.
Yeah.
or you went with a vanity press, which would charge you a crap load of money to print like 5,000 copies that probably wouldn't sell at all because you still couldn't get the word out,
Yeah.
So I'd say it's definitely a better situation for self-publishing.
Totally. And we started this by, because I brought up the musicians, it's the same thing as recording an album, going on tour, selling it out of the back of your van. It's almost the same kind of thing. Yeah. Well, Jeff, this has been a blast, man. I usually kind of end these with two quick questions. First, you brought it up. Do you do social media, anything like that? Is that, I don't know, Twitter, Instagram, or can people get in touch?
Yeah. I'm on Twitter. It's pretty easy to find me there. And I post a lot of photos of the wildlife from our yard because we've been rewilding the yard for a while. And so, you're going to find raccoons, possums, armadillos, and birds.
Yeah.
And I am also on Facebook. I'm not as much on Instagram. I'm actually locked out of Instagram right now because I had multiple accounts and they couldn't figure me out.
Okay.
But you can find me on Twitter for sure. What now?
It's
just Jeff VanderMeer. You'll find me right away.
Okay, cool. And last question, as a Florida guy, what bookstores do you like to represent? Where should people buy your books from?
Tombolo in Tampa, Third House in Gainesville, and in my hometown, Tallahassee, Midtown Reader.
You a Tom Petty fan?
I am actually. I actually went to the high school that Tom Petty didn't go to in Gainesville.
Gainesville, I had to ask. Jeff, this has been a blast, man.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks for taking the time. And we'll talk boxing, I'm sure, at some point.
Yeah, really. Thanks.
All right, Jeff. Take care, man.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot, dude.
Yeah, I didn't expect the boxing. That's great.
Well, I mean, listen, I could talk boxing for 3 hours.
I know.
Yeah, no, I'm super stoked. I mean, if you want to talk, we could talk boxing. But yeah, no, yeah, it's great. I started boxing a couple years ago, and that's when I got into it. And the workout. I mean, I don't know if you're.
The workout is amazing. Yeah, to do that.
It's the best workout you can do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the best. All right, Jeff, dude, enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Take care. Thanks a lot.